Noah's Ark has been rediscovered in the southern gorge of Greater Mount Ararat between 3,900 meters and 4,700 meters above sea level, buried 4 to 11 meters under the surface of the gorge, under numerous lithic or rock and ice strata. It's certainly Noah's Ark. The hulls are angled inward toward the keel. There's thousands of cages. There's every sort of animal byproduct, non-skeletal animal byproduct, from hair to fur to exoskeletons to scutes, from mammals, avian species, birds, reptiles, amphibians, and insects. Also, there's very large sloping ramps where animals were led to their cages. There's also a lot of perches where birds were tied to horizontal beams made of cypress. It's just phenomenal. Not only are the animal byproducts phenomenal, but also the architecture. The architecture is clearly a maritime barge, not only with the hull structures, but they have significant ballast features along the lowest deck. There's 3 decks, the entire length of the barge, to help balance the structure, provide stability in rough seas, also providing safety. Very few human habitations, very few people were aboard the Ark, and that is evidenced by not only very few and very small cramped human quarters, but also the furniture is all affixed to the walls. So you have wood furniture all affixed to the walls to prevent safety issues in rough seas. Now, the exterior and the interior of the vessel, and indeed many of the artifacts, the wood artifacts and vegetal material, are covered with 2 types of sealant: a resin, cypress resin, and also a bitumen or a petroleum-based sealant that is covered on the interior and exterior of the site. The site dates to the late Epipaleolithic period, from 13,100 to 9,600 BC in conventional dating terms. There's no pottery within the structure, and it's filled with baskets, vegetal material, stone tools, and an array of wood and bone artifacts. The wood is uniquely of seafaring materials, specifically cypress, Cupressa sempervirens, the Mediterranean cypress, and the exterior planks have been aged, so they're covered with cypress sap. But also oak is evident, in a minority of cases, teak. So you have 3 types of wood, all seafaring, that are rot resistant, resistant to decomposition, and also to electromagnetic currents that degrade the strength of a hull and the exterior of the hull. Also, on portions of the hull, we see evidence of crustaceans and barnacles, which would not be surprising, except this maritime barge is buried 3,900 to 4,700 meters above sea level. So we talked about the archaeological efficacy of the site, but now the question remains, why? Why has this site been hidden for so long? And Armenian, Turkish, and especially Georgian, from the Republic of Georgia, archaeologists and anthropologists are really going to have very unique perspective. This is just the beginning of the studies, and I'm just literally presenting an aperitif before the main course, where the larger anthropological investigation is in terms of why this site was hidden for so long. And the main reason that Noah's Ark was just only recently rediscovered and has been hidden for so long is principally due to Armenian nationalism. Anthropologists and searchers for the Ark didn't realize that Armenians held Noah's Ark in such high regard and were willing to misdirect foreigners away from the actual location of Noah's Ark in the southern gorge to prevent their national symbol, what they regard as their national symbol of being detrimentally affected. But we didn't ascertain that this was the case. And so when we heard about Armenian accounts of where the Noah's Ark was, we didn't take into account that they would try to be misdirecting us because Noah's Ark is their national symbol. Noah's Ark is prominent in Armenian culture because they believe Haik, the ancestor of all Armenians, was the great grandson of Noah, and they believe that they were chosen, the Armenians are a chosen people to protect the Ark all these years. And I was in a fortunate position because not only have I been to the site, but I've also studied the assemblages both in Dogu Bayazit, and also many of the assemblages were carried off the site in 1907 at the direction of Murktach Krimian, the Catholicos of the Armenian Apostolic Church, or the Armenian National Church, if you will. And I was not only able to analyze the artifacts from these 6 assemblages in the Republic of Georgia, but I was also able to meet with the descendants of the Armenian guides that in the late 1800s and the beginning of the 1900s until 1907 when Noah's Ark was closed down and they filled up all the tunnels that were leading to the entrances to Noah's Ark. And what was very interesting was how and why they kept the site hidden for so long. And we discussed the why, because this was the symbol of Armenian nationalism, the symbol of their people, and they were loath to have foreigners detrimentally impact the Ark. So that's the why. Now let's discuss the how. And the first instance of Armenians misdirecting foreigners away from Noah's Ark started with the Mount Qardu Ruse. I'm going to show you a map. Noah's Ark is located in the middle of the Kingdom of Armenia. And here is the Kingdom of Armenia during the classical period. Now, the actual location is right in the middle of the Kingdom of Armenia, but I want you to look at Mount Qardu. Mount Qardu is located near the southern border between the Parthian Empire and the Kingdom of Armenia, and they were mortal enemies. And the Armenian elites during the classical period were very concerned that the Parthians would use the pretense of worshiping or venerating Noah's Ark as a pretense for capturing the heart of Armenia and traveling into the interior of the Kingdom of Armenia. So what the Armenian elites did is they created an artificial ark. And what they did was they took wood pieces, fashioned them to make them look like they were from the ark, namely with mortise and tenon joints and large wood beams, and carried them from the local town of Temanin to the summit of Mount Qardu. And from here, they tried to convince local tribespeople now in northern Syria that this was the actual location of Noah's Ark. Again, these were non-Armenians that they were talking to try to convince them that Noah's Ark was actually on Mount Qardu. Several centuries later, during the 6th century AD, the Islamic prophet Muhammad saw right through this ruse. Himself and the first Rashidun Caliph, Abu-Bakr, and General Khalid went directly toward Noah's Ark in the interior of Armenia. And we know that some of his forces made it to Noah's Ark because we have an Arab censer that was found in sub-area B3 in Locust 3. And so we know that Muhammad had direct knowledge of the Ark simply because he mentioned it as having 2 decks. In sub-area B3, Noah had cut away this deck so that they could put in the larger animals and then backtrack and put in smaller, thinner boards where they could house more species of birds. And these are characterized by the perches with little wood pegs that they wrapped the leather harnesses around to secure the birds and make sure that these avian remains did not fly all over the place. But this shows that the Islamic prophet Muhammad had direct knowledge of the site. Now, every time the Arab forces tried to invade the interior of Armenia, General Khalid was always distracted by opposing enemies. He had to fight the Byzantine Empire in several grand battles, the Persian Empire in several large battles, and the Armenians. And then a series of events happened. In 632 AD, the Islamic prophet Muhammad passed away. 2 years later, the first Rashidun Caliph Abu-Bakr passed away. And in 638, General Khalid was dismissed. He was put into a retirement, some people say a forced retirement. And then several years after that, a tremendous plague broke out, preventing Muslim forces from invading the interior of Armenia. So this prevented the invasion, but also what it did, it allowed the artifice, the ruse of Mount Qardu to expand. Indeed, the tribesmen around Mount Qardu, the non-Armenian, began to believe that the wood pieces on the top of Mount Qardu were the actual remains of Noah's Ark, and this caught on. And it caught on so much so that by the 9th century AD, several notable Muslim scholars started believing that Mount Qardu was the actual location of Noah's Ark. Now, the Islamic prophet Muhammad knew this was not the case because he described the location of the Ark as Al-Judi'i, meaning the highest place or the great height. And Noah's Ark is literally the highest mountain in all the Near East. And this was very significant because not only did the Islamic prophet know some of the inner features of the Ark from his advanced forces from General Khalid, but he also knew it because he described Noah's Ark was on the greatest height. And indeed, it is on the greatest height on Greater Mount Ararat in the southern gorge. But what happened was the tribes around Temanin and around Mount Qardu believed the Armenian artifice at Mount Qardu. By the 9th century to the 14th century, notable Islamic scholars started equating the artifice, the Mount Qardu, with Al-Judi'i. They began to believe that what the Islamic prophet mentioned was Mount Qardu, and so they started calling it Judi'i or Mount Judi'i. And these were notable scholars, namely Ibn Qardadbe, Ibn Battuta. Now, during this time were the influx of the Turkic peoples, who also converted to Islam, forming the Ottoman Empire, and then what is now the Republic of Turkey. And so what we have is this Armenian artifice at Mount Qardu thoroughly enmeshed in Turkic or Turkish culture and religious beliefs. But this, from the very beginning, was an Armenian ruse. Also, there's several lines of archaeological evidence that show how well this ruse worked for the Armenian people. First of all, from the artifacts that I've studied from inside the Republic of Georgia and in the southern gorge of Greater Mount Ararat and in the structure, there is no artifacts from the classical period. Now, the interior of the structure is uniquely from the late Epipaleolithic period, namely from 15,100 BC to 9,600 BC. There's no pottery there. It's just stone artifacts, wood, bone artifacts, baskets, and wood architecture. But on entrances to the site, there are little small worship areas that were accessed by Armenians and other individuals and other cultures digging passages through the snow and ice to get to these little worship areas, and these are filled with all types of pottery from the pottery Neolithic to 1907. But what pottery types are absent are from the classical period, from 250 BC to 250 AD. There's no artifacts that I've seen that are from the classical period. So the Armenians were very careful to prevent people from going to these worship areas and worshiping at these sites. I think they just covered up everything. Now, what's interesting is Josephus. Josephus mentions Noah's Ark, correctly describes the interior, that Noah's Ark is braced with crossbeams. He also mentions that Romans went up to the site and took little mementos of the bitumen and resin sealant that was on the exterior of the ark. Now, but what he says, though, is very interesting. He writes down that, the site is in Qardu, again, propagating the Mount Qardu Ruse. So here we need to look at this more closely. The Romans and the Armenians were very strong allies, chiefly because they had a very serious enemy, both the Roman Empire and the Kingdom of Armenia, the Parthians. And with Josephus, he is the Roman Jewish historian of the Emperor Vespasian and his son Titus, a very serious scholar representing the emperor. And here he would have knowledge of the Armenian elites, of the interior of the site and where the site was actually located. But he was very careful in his histories to say that the site was in Qardu, continue with this Qardu Ruse, simply because he wanted to make sure that Parthians did not know the actual location of the site and travel into the interior of the Kingdom of Armenia, namely to Greater Mount Ararat, to detrimentally affect the Kingdom of Armenia, which was a close ally of Rome against the Parthians. These several lines of independent evidence suggest the efficacy of this ruse, and this earliest attempt, starting in 247 BC, to misdirect foreigners, non-Armenians, away from the actual location of the site on Greater Mount Ararat, and project this artifice that was taken up first by the local tribes people around Temanin, near the southern border of the Kingdom of Armenia and the Parthian Empire, then adopted by Muslim scholars, Yaqut al-Hamwi, Ibn Battuta, and then projected and inculcated into Turkish culture, and is now even prominent in the Republic of Turkey. Yes, it preserved the Ark these thousands of years, from 247 BC to the present day. The problem is it misdirected individuals from trying to protect, preserve, and initiate research of Greater Mount Ararat and Noah's Ark. And several terrible things have happened. First, tremendous looting of the site from 1907, where the Armenian guides, allegedly at the behest of the Catholicos Crimean, to take artifacts from the Ark into what is now the Republic of Georgia. And second of all, we have a serious issue now with decomposition. The glacial ice and the permafrost around Greater Mount Ararat has melted, and the ice has retreated nearly 50%. And now large areas of Noah's Ark are decomposing, and the fungal growth has just exploded. And so it's a very serious situation right now. And archaeologists in the Republic of Turkey is just beginning to understand the elements of this tragedy and the dramatic need for not only protection, which has occurred, but also now Noah's Ark is in dire need of conservation techniques to preserve the wood architecture, preserve the organic artifacts, and then to initiate research on this truly wonderful site that is a foundation of three world religions, namely Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and is so important to science because this represents the apogee, the height of Stone Age culture, and the progenitor site, the origin site for the Neolithic Revolution or the Farming Age. Thank you.